The Zephyrian ships descended like silver teardrops against the amber sky of dawn, their hulls catching the first light as they settled into formation above major population centers. Commander Veltar adjusted his sensory apparatus, studying the readouts from the planetary surface below. Earth's electromagnetic signatures pulsed in neat, predictable patterns, cities humming with what appeared to be organized civilization. Initial assessment, Science Officer Kex Nal. Veltar's voice carried the harmonic undertones that marked him as high-caste military. Kex Nal's 4 eyes flickered across multiple data streams simultaneously, a trait that had made her invaluable during their conquest of 17 previous worlds. Bipedal mammals, average height 1.7 meters. Carbon-based, oxygen-dependent. Crude technology, chemical propulsion, basic nuclear fission, primitive computing networks. Their military capabilities appear quaint. Through the observation deck's transparent aluminum, Veltar watched the tiny figures moving through the streets of what their databases identified as New York City. The humans scurried about their morning routines, unaware that their world had just shifted on its axis. Estimated resistance duration, based on previous conquests of similar civilizations, no more than 72 hours. Their governments will capitulate once they realize the futility of resistance. Kex Nal paused, her secondary eyes focusing on an anomalous reading. There is one curious behavioral pattern, however. Explain. A significant percentage of the population appears to engage in a daily ritual involving the consumption of a heated liquid. Our chemical analysis suggests it's a stimulant of some kind. They call it coffee. The behavior is nearly universal among adults. Veltar's mandibles clicked dismissively. Primitive chemical dependency. It will make them easier to control once we restrict supply. How wrong he was. The formal announcement came at precisely 0800 Greenwich Mean Time. Every screen, every radio, every communication device on Earth simultaneously broadcast the same message in perfect, unaccented English. Citizens of Earth, your planet is now under the protection of the Zephyrian Collective. Remain calm. Comply with all directives. Resistance is futile and will be met with appropriate measures. In a small apartment in Brooklyn, Sarah Martinez was reaching for her morning coffee when the message interrupted her breakfast routine. She stood frozen, mug halfway to her lips, as the alien voice continued its proclamation. The coffee grew cold in her hands as she watched grainy footage of the ships hovering over every major city. Her phone buzzed. A text from her boyfriend Marcus, stationed at Fort Bragg. Base is on lockdown. Don't know what's happening. Love you. We'll find you. Sarah's hands trembled as she set down the untouched coffee. Outside her window, she could see neighbors gathering on stoops and fire escapes, pointing at the sky where a massive ship hung motionless above Manhattan. By noon, the coffee shops were empty, not because people had stopped wanting coffee, but because the Zephyrians had identified the beverage as a non-essential luxury item and banned its production and distribution as their first administrative act. They reasoned that eliminating recreational stimulants would make the population more docile and manageable. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a xenobiologist at Columbia University, was among the first to recognize the catastrophic miscalculation the aliens had made. She'd been studying circadian rhythms and caffeine dependency for over a decade. As she watched the Zephyrian ships through her office window, her coffee maker gurgling its last authorized brew, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. They have no idea what they've just done, she whispered to her empty lab. 48 hours into the occupation, the first symptoms began manifesting across the globe. What the Zephyrians had dismissed as mild chemical dependency revealed itself as something far more complex and dangerous. Sarah hadn't slept in 2 days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's face from their last video call, him promising he'd come home from his deployment, her promising to wait. Now she didn't even know if he was alive. The alien ships blocked most military communications, and civilian networks were heavily monitored. Her head pounded with a rhythm that seemed to match her heartbeat. The coffee withdrawal was merging with grief and rage into something she didn't recognize. She found herself standing at her window for hours, staring at the Zephyrian ship, her fists clenched so tightly her nails drew blood from her palms. Across the city, similar scenes were playing out in millions of homes and apartments. The Zephyrians had expected some minor civil unrest. They prepared for riots, protests, the usual expressions of conquered populations. What they hadn't anticipated was the particular cocktail of neurochemistry that occurred when you combined caffeine withdrawal with existential terror and heartbreak. Dr. Vasquez made her way through streets filled with increasingly agitated people. The Zephyrians had established checkpoints at major intersections, their tall, mantis-like forms standing in stark contrast to the growing crowds of humans who seemed to be moving with a different energy than before. She could see it in their eyes, a hollow, focused intensity that she recognized from her research subjects during caffeine deprivation studies, but amplified by trauma and loss. At the checkpoint near Columbus Circle, she watched a middle-aged businessman approach a Zephyrian guard. The alien's translation device rendered his words into perfect English. "Citizen, return to your designated residential zone." The businessman's response was barely above a whisper, but there was something in his tone that made the alien step back. "My wife was visiting her sister in Chicago when you arrived. I haven't heard from her in 2 days. I need to find her. Communication will be restored when security protocols are established. Return to your zone." Dr. Vasquez saw the exact moment when something shifted in the man's expression. His caffeine-deprived brain, already struggling with dopamine regulation, seemed to latch onto the alien's indifference with a focus that was almost predatory. He didn't argue further, didn't raise his voice. He simply stared at the Zephyrian with an intensity that seemed to make the much larger alien uncomfortable. As she continued toward the university, Dr. Vasquez began documenting what she observed. The humans weren't becoming more docile, as the aliens had predicted. They were becoming more focused, more purposeful, and infinitely more dangerous. Commander Veltar reviewed the daily reports from his fleet commanders with growing confusion. Incidents of civil disobedience were increasing, but not in ways his tactical advisors had prepared for. Instead of large-scale riots or organized military resistance, they were dealing with thousands of individual acts of what could only be described as creative sabotage. "Explain this report from Sector 7, he demanded. Junior Officer Pexton consulted his display. A human female, approximately 30 years old, managed to disable 7 of our surveillance drones using what appears to be paperclips and rubber bands. Paperclips. Small metal fastening devices. Primitive, but apparently effective when deployed with sufficient ingenuity." Veltar's mandibles clicked in agitation. "And this one from Sector 12? A human male constructed an elaborate trap using common household items that resulted in 3 of our patrol units becoming stuck to the ground with a substance their databases identify as superglue. How is this possible? Our intelligence suggested humans required complex organization to pose any threat." Science Officer Kex NAL interrupted the briefing, her 4 eyes wide with what Veltar recognized as concern. "Commander, I believe we may have made an error in our initial assessment." "Explain." "The substance we banned, coffee, appears to have a more complex relationship with human neurochemistry than we initially understood. Our medical scans show that withdrawal from this stimulant, combined with the psychological stress of occupation, is producing unexpected behavioral modifications." Veltar studied the data streams flowing across his command display. Reports were coming in from occupied cities around the globe. Humans exhibiting increased problem-solving abilities, enhanced focus, and what could only be described as a complete disregard for their own safety when pursuing objectives. Are they becoming more intelligent? Not exactly. They're becoming more determined and creative in their determination. On Earth's surface, Dr. Vasquez was conducting her own research. She'd managed to gather a small group of colleagues from various disciplines, neuroscientists, psychologists, even a few anthropologists who'd been studying human stress responses. They met in secret, usually in the university's sub-basement levels where Zephyrian surveillance was limited. The data is consistent across all populations, reported Dr. James Chin, a specialist in addiction medicine. Caffeine withdrawal typically peaks at 48 to 72 hours, but what we're seeing goes beyond normal dependency symptoms. How so? Dr. Vasquez asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. The aliens have created a perfect storm. Caffeine withdrawal affects dopamine and adenosine regulation, which normally would just cause headaches and fatigue. But combine that with the stress response from losing family members, jobs, entire social structures, plus the fact that many of these people are also dealing with separation from loved ones due to the communication blackouts, and you get something unprecedented. Dr. Vasquez nodded grimly. Hyperfocus combined with emotional dysregulation and a complete breakdown of normal risk assessment. Exactly. And here's the really interesting part. It seems to be making them remarkably good at solving complex problems, as long as those problems involve harming or hindering the occupation forces. Above them, through several floors of concrete and steel, Sarah Martinez was putting this theory into practice. She'd spent the last 18 hours constructing what she called the Marcus Memorial Fuck You machine, a complex array of mirrors, kitchen timers, and salvaged electronics that would redirect the Zephyrians' own surveillance beams to create a massive feedback loop in their monitoring systems. She worked with the methodical precision of someone who hadn't slept in days, but whose mind was crystalline clear about exactly one thing, making the aliens regret every decision that had led them to her planet. Every wire she stripped, every circuit she jury-rigged. She did in memory of Marcus's last message and in service of the cold fury that had replaced her grief. As she made the final connections, Sarah realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so focused, so purposeful. The absence of caffeine had somehow sharpened rather than dulled her thoughts, as if her brain had stripped away everything non-essential and left only what she needed for this singular task. The machine activated with a soft hum. Within minutes, every Zephyrian surveillance drone in a 6-block radius would be effectively blind. It was just the beginning. 3 weeks into the occupation, Commander Veltar stood in his situation room, surrounded by holographic displays that painted an increasingly troubling picture. Each red that represented an incident of sabotage. Each yellow triangle marked a disrupted patrol. Each blue square indicated a successful human evasion of Zephyrian forces. The map looked like it was developing a rash. "Sir, we're receiving reports from Fleet Commander Zorthan in the European sector," reported Communications Officer Nexville, her voice carrying undertones of barely controlled panic. "The humans in a city called Paris have somehow managed to turn their underground transportation system into a maze that our troops cannot navigate." Veltar's primary eyes focused on the European data stream. "How is this possible? Our forces have superior technology, enhanced senses, and detailed mapping systems." According to the report, the humans have been rearranging the signage. They've created false directional markers, blocked passages with what appears to be street art, and established a series of acoustic traps. Acoustic traps? Sounds that cause extreme discomfort to our auditory systems. They appear to have identified the specific frequencies that cause pain to Zephyrian hearing and have hidden sonic devices throughout their tunnel systems. Science Officer Kex NAL looked up from her own analysis station. "Commander, I'm seeing similar patterns in every occupied zone. The humans are demonstrating an unprecedented level of coordination without any apparent communication network. This was perhaps the most unsettling development of all. The Zephyrians had jammed most electronic communications and were monitoring the rest. Yet somehow the resistance efforts seemed to be following similar patterns across continents. In Tokyo, humans were using origami to create paper-based disruption devices. In London, they'd figured out how to weaponize their famously unpredictable weather forecasting system to confuse Zephyrian atmospheric processors. In Sao Paulo, they'd somehow convinced the city's massive population of street dogs to treat all Zephyrian patrols as intruders. Dr. Vasquez was beginning to understand why. In her underground laboratory, she'd been studying samples from volunteers who'd been without caffeine for varying lengths of time. What she found challenged everything she thought she knew about human neurochemistry. "Look at these brain scans," she told her colleague Dr. Chin. pointing to a series of images displayed on her salvaged equipment. This is a normal human brain on caffeine. Notice the widespread neural activity. Caffeine affects multiple neurotransmitter systems, keeping the whole brain active but somewhat scattered. She switched to another image. This is the same subject after 2 weeks of caffeine withdrawal combined with chronic stress. Notice how the activity has consolidated into specific regions, areas associated with problem solving, pattern recognition, and threat assessment. Dr. Chen leaned closer. It's like their brains are becoming specialized tools. Exactly. And here's the really remarkable part. She pulled up a third scan. This is what happens when you add emotional trauma to the mix. The limbic system integration becomes incredibly efficient. They're not just thinking about solutions, they're feeling them. Above their heads, the city of New York had transformed into something that would have been unrecognizable to its pre-invasion inhabitants. Sarah Martinez had become something of a local legend. The woman who'd figured out how to hack Zephyrian technology using nothing but scraps, and an encyclopedic knowledge of electrical engineering born from 48 hours of caffeinated hyperfocus, followed by 3 weeks of withdrawal-fueled obsession. She moved through the transformed cityscape like a ghost, part of a loose network of individuals who'd never met, but who operated with an almost telepathic coordination. The coffee shop on 84th Street had become a dead drop for modified electronics. The bookstore on Amsterdam was now a hub for distributing hand-drawn maps of Zephyrian patrol patterns. The art supply store near Columbia had become an arms depot for increasingly sophisticated improvised devices. Sarah's latest project was her most ambitious yet. She called it the Heartbreak Network, a citywide system of interconnected devices that would use the Zephyrians' own communication arrays to broadcast a very specific signal, the sound of a human heart breaking, amplified and modulated to frequencies that would cause severe disorientation in alien nervous systems. As she worked, she thought about Marcus, not with the sharp pain of the first days, but with a focused intensity that seemed to guide her hands as she stripped wires and soldered circuits. Each connection was a promise, each modification a prayer that somewhere, somehow, he was still alive and would understand what she was doing. The Zephyrians, meanwhile, were discovering that their standard protocols for managing conquered populations were not only ineffective, but seemed to be making the situation progressively worse. "We could restore their access to the stimulant," suggested Junior Officer Pexton during one of Veltar's increasingly frequent emergency briefings. Perhaps returning to baseline neurochemistry would reduce the resistance. Kex NAL consulted her behavioral analysis data. "I'm afraid it's too late for that approach, Commander. Our psychological profiles suggest that the withdrawal process has been complicated by significant emotional trauma. Many of the humans have lost contact with family members, romantic partners, or other attachment figures due to our communication restrictions and travel prohibitions. And this is significant how humans appear to form extremely strong pair bonds and social connections. When these bonds are disrupted under stressful conditions, they exhibit persistent behavioral modifications. Even if we restored caffeine access now, the underlying trauma would continue to drive resistance behaviors." Veltar studied the data streams showing human activity patterns. In every occupied zone, he could see the evidence of what his science officer described. Individuals who'd been separated from loved ones were demonstrating levels of focused aggression that seemed almost supernatural. Mothers searching for children were showing up in classified military installations. Husbands seeking missing wives were appearing in high-security Zephyrian command centers. Partners separated by the occupation were somehow coordinating sabotage efforts across continents. "What do you recommend?" he asked, though he was beginning to suspect that they'd stumbled into something far more complex than a simple planetary conquest. "Honestly, Commander, I recommend we study these humans more carefully before proceeding. Their behavioral patterns suggest we've encountered something unique among the species we've previously conquered." "How so?" "Other species we've subdued have been either highly logical, in which case superior technology and tactical advantage were sufficient, or primarily instinct-driven, making them predictable. Humans appear to be something else entirely, logical enough to create sophisticated countermeasures, but driven by emotional imperatives that make them unpredictable and remarkably persistent. As if to underscore Kexenael's point, alerts began flashing across the command center's displays. The Heartbreak Network had just gone active, and every Zephyrian within 50 kilometers of Manhattan was experiencing severe neurological distress. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez had been trapped in the sealed bunker beneath Fort Bragg for 23 days. The Zephyrians had hit the base hard in their initial assault, but their target had been the communications array and the command structure. They'd either not detected the underground storage facility where Marcus and 17 other soldiers had been conducting inventory, or they hadn't considered it a priority threat. Now, as Marcus stared at the makeshift workshop he'd constructed from military electronics and components salvaged from the base's wreckage, he realized the aliens had made a critical error in their assessment of human threat levels. Like Sarah, Marcus hadn't had caffeine in weeks. Like Sarah, he was dealing with the particular agony of separation from someone he loved during crisis. Unlike Sarah, he had access to advanced military hardware and 18 years of training in creative problem-solving under extreme stress conditions. "Rodriguez, you need to see this," called Sergeant Kim, one of the other trapped soldiers. She was hunched over a radio receiver they'd managed to jury-rig from spare parts. "I'm picking up signals, not military channels, but civilian bands. And the patterns? I think it's some kind of code." Marcus moved to the radio station, his steps careful and deliberate. The caffeine withdrawal had passed through its acute phase and settled into something else, a state of hypervigilant calm that made every sound, every sensation, every piece of information feel significant and interconnected. The radio crackled with what sounded like random static, but as Marcus listened, he began to hear the patterns Kim had identified. Short bursts, long tones, pauses that seemed too deliberate to be natural. "It's not standard Morse," he said after several minutes of analysis. "But there's definitely structure. Can you isolate the frequency?" Kim made adjustments to their improvised equipment. "It's coming from multiple sources. New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Denver. All broadcasting on the same frequency, but slightly offset timing." Marcus felt something click in his mind, the same sensation he'd experienced when solving complex tactical problems during his military training, but sharper, more focused. They're coordinating. Someone figured out how to use the aliens' own jamming systems as a broadcast network. As they continued monitoring, the coded messages began revealing a picture of resistance efforts unlike anything in military history. No central command, no traditional hierarchy, but thousands of individuals and small groups working toward common objectives, with an almost supernatural level of coordination. "Listen to this," Kim said, adjusting the frequency. "This transmission is coming from the Pacific Northwest. Same coding pattern, but different content." The message, when decoded, described a successful operation to disable Zephyrian mining equipment using nothing but industrial magnets and knowledge of alien metallurgy gleaned from debris analysis. The technical sophistication of the sabotage was remarkable, but what struck Marcus most was the personal notation at the end of the transmission. "For Jenny and the kids, still looking for you. Stay strong. Love, Dad." They're not just fighting, Marcus realized. They're searching. Every one of these resistance cells is also a missing persons operation. Kim nodded grimly. The aliens separated families, cut communications, blocked travel. They created thousands of people with nothing to lose and very specific reasons to become creative with problem solving. Marcus thought of Sarah, alone in their Brooklyn apartment, dealing with the same caffeine withdrawal, the same separation anxiety, the same desperate need to do something, anything, that might bring them back together. He imagined her brilliant mind, freed from normal constraints by withdrawal and trauma, focused entirely on the twin objectives of revenge and reunion. "We need to make contact," he decided. "If there's a resistance network operating, we need to contribute. And I need to find Sarah." The next phase of their operation required careful planning. The bunker had been their sanctuary, but it was also their prison. To join the surface resistance, they'd have to risk exposure to Zephyrian patrols. Marcus had been working on a solution to that problem for days, using his understanding of alien sensor technology combined with materials from the base's Electronic Warfare Division. "Show me the stealth field generator again," requested Specialist Torres, one of the younger soldiers who'd proven remarkably adept at electronics modification. "I think I can improve the power efficiency by another 15%. Marcus handed over the device he'd constructed, a backpack-sized array of modified radio equipment that could, in theory, create an area of electromagnetic interference that would make human heat signatures invisible to Zephyrian sensors. It was based on principles from captured alien technology, adapted using human engineering creativity and powered by pure determination to survive. "The beautiful thing about withdrawal-induced hyperfocus," he explained as Torres made adjustments, "is that you can hold incredibly complex technical specifications in your head simultaneously. I've been running interference pattern calculations for days without writing anything down." Torres looked up from the device. "And you sure about the alien sensor frequencies?" "As sure as I can be, without direct testing." "But Torres," Marcus's expression grew serious, "if I'm wrong about this, the first time we test it will probably be the last time we test anything." "Understood, sir. But staying here isn't really an option either, is it?" Marcus thought of the coded radio messages, of the citywide resistance networks, of Sarah working alone in their apartment with nothing but her brilliant mind and her broken heart to guide her. "No, it's not an option." That night, as the 18 soldiers prepared for their first surface mission in over 3 weeks, Marcus stood in the bunker's communication center, holding a microphone connected to their jury-rigged transmitter. He'd spent hours composing the message he was about to send, encoding it using the pattern he'd identified from the resistance broadcasts. "Heartbreak Network, this is Ghost Actual," he began, using call signs that felt appropriate for their new reality. 18 souls seeking reunion protocol. Special delivery package available for express service to Zephyrian logistics centers. Personal note for Brooklyn Angel. Marcus is coming home. Repeat, Marcus is coming home. He didn't know if Sarah would hear the message. He didn't know if she was even alive. But as he spoke the words into the microphone, he felt the same focused clarity that had been guiding all of his actions since the occupation began. Somewhere in the electromagnetic spectrum, carried on radio waves that bounced off alien jamming systems and filtered through improvised receivers built by heartbroken geniuses, his voice would reach her. Above ground, in a transformed New York City, Sarah Martinez paused in her work on what she'd begun calling the Marcus Amplifier, a device designed to boost the range and power of the Heartbreak Network. Something in the radio static had changed, a pattern that seemed different from the usual resistance coordination signals. She fine-tuned her receiver, and when she heard the words Brooklyn Angel, her hands stopped moving entirely. For the first time in weeks, the constant noise in her head, the withdrawal symptoms, the grief, the focused rage, went completely quiet. Marcus is coming home. Sarah closed her eyes and felt something shift in her chest. Not the sharp pain of loss she'd been carrying, but something else. Something that felt like purpose crystallizing into perfect clarity. She opened her eyes and looked at her workstation, at the city beyond her window, at the alien ships hanging in the sky like mechanical vultures. When she started working again, her movements had a different quality, not the manic energy of the past weeks, but the deliberate precision of someone who now had a specific target and unlimited time to plan. The Zephyrians were about to discover what happened when you reunited two humans who'd learned to weaponize their love for each other. The reunion took place in Central Park, in the shadow of a Zephyrian listening post that had been mysteriously malfunctioning for the past week. Sarah had been working her way through the city's surveillance network, creating blind spots and dead zones using increasingly sophisticated countermeasures. Marcus had led his team through a carefully planned route from Fort Bragg, using the stealth technology he'd developed and the resistance network's coordination to avoid Zephyrian patrols. When Sarah saw Marcus emerge from the tree line near the Bethesda fountain, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to navigate around alien sensors, she felt something she hadn't experienced since the occupation began. complete stillness. For a moment, the constant background hum of withdrawal symptoms and suppressed rage simply stopped. Then he was close enough to touch, and she discovered that 3 weeks of separation and trauma hadn't diminished their connection. It had refined it into something sharper, more focused, and infinitely more dangerous to anyone who might threaten it. "You built the heartbreak network," Marcus said, and it wasn't a question. He could see the evidence in her eyes, in the way she moved, in the subtle modifications to electronics she carried. "You brought friends," Sarah replied, nodding toward the other soldiers who'd emerged from concealment around the park's perimeter. They moved with the same focused precision she recognized in her own actions, people whose normal psychological constraints had been stripped away by withdrawal and trauma, leaving only essential functions optimized for survival and problem-solving. 18 of the best improvisational engineers the Army has ever trained, all with nothing left to lose and very specific things they want to find, Marcus confirmed. "What's our tactical situation?" Sarah smiled, and Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. It was the expression of someone who'd spent weeks turning their grief into weapons and their love into strategic advantage. "We own the information systems. The power grid is compromised but functional, on our terms. The transportation network has been modified. And I've been having very interesting conversations with some of the other separated couples in the city." She led them to a construction site near Columbus Circle, where a series of underground tunnels had been converted into something that looked like a cross between a military command center and an advanced research laboratory. The walls were covered with charts, diagrams, and what appeared to be psychological profiles of individual Zephyrian commanders. "Dr. Vasquez and her team have been studying alien behavioral patterns," Sarah explained as they descended into the facility. "It turns out they're just as vulnerable to emotional manipulation as we are. They just have different trigger points." Dr. Vasquez looked up from a bank of monitors displaying various data streams. She'd lost weight during the occupation, and her eyes had the same focused intensity Marcus recognized in all the human faces around him. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, I presume. Your girlfriend has become something of a legend in our little underground community." "What kind of community?" asked Sergeant Kim. "Heartbroken geniuses with technical skills and nothing left to lose," replied Dr. Chen from across the room. "Turns out there are a lot more of us than anyone expected." The space was filled with people working on projects that seemed to blend advanced science with what could only be described as weaponized creativity. A woman in the corner was constructing something that looked like a sculpture made of electronic components and broken glass. 2 men were having an intense discussion about frequency modulation for emotional resonance. A teenager was building what appeared to be a robot designed specifically to annoy alien patrol units. "The beautiful thing about heartbreak," Dr. Vasquez explained as she led them through the facility, "is that it strips away social inhibitions and normal risk assessment while simultaneously enhancing pattern recognition and problem-solving abilities. Combine that with caffeine withdrawal, which creates hyperfocus and eliminates non-essential neural activity, and you get individuals who are remarkably good at identifying and exploiting weaknesses." She stopped at a wall covered with detailed anatomical drawings of Zephyrian physiology. "We've learned a lot about our occupiers. They're individually stronger and more technologically advanced than humans, but they have some very specific vulnerabilities." "Such as?" Marcus asked. "They're extremely vulnerable to certain types of emotional manipulation. Their social structure is based on strict hierarchy and predictable behavioral patterns. They literally cannot comprehend the kind of chaotic creativity that humans exhibit under extreme stress." Sarah moved to another section of the wall, where a complex diagram showed what appeared to be psychological profiles of individual alien commanders. "They also form attachment bonds, just like humans do. And when those bonds are threatened," she pointed to a series of behavioral analysis charts. "Well, let's just say they don't handle separation anxiety any better than we do." Marcus studied the diagrams, feeling pieces of a larger strategy clicking into place in his mind. "You're not just planning to drive them off the planet. You're planning to turn their own emotional vulnerabilities against them." "Better than that," Sarah replied. We're planning to make them experience exactly what they've done to us. The plan that emerged over the following weeks was unlike anything in the history of warfare. Instead of direct military confrontation, the resistance had developed what Dr. Vasquez termed empathetic warfare, a strategy designed to make the Zephyrians experience the same emotional trauma they'd inflicted on human populations. Sarah and Marcus worked together with an efficiency that seemed almost telepathic. Weeks of separation and individual focus had given each of them specialized skills, but reunion had restored their ability to coordinate and amplify each other's capabilities. They moved through the resistance network like nodes in a larger organism, connecting disparate projects and individuals into an increasingly sophisticated operational matrix. The key insight, Sarah explained to a gathering of resistance cell leaders, is that the Zephyrians didn't come here alone. They have families, attachment figures, individuals they care about back in their home systems. Their military doctrine assumes they can impose separation and isolation on conquered populations without experiencing it themselves. Marcus stood beside her, consulting reports from cells around the globe. But they've been away from home for months now, with limited communication back to their families. And their rigid command structure means individual soldiers can't make contact with loved ones without going through official channels. Dr. Vasquez added, "Our analysis suggests they're already experiencing early-stage separation anxiety. They're just better at suppressing it than humans are. Until now." The first phase of the Heartbreak Protocol involved systematic disruption of Zephyrian communication networks, not to prevent them from receiving orders, but to block their personal communications with home. The resistance had identified the specific frequencies used for private messages between soldiers and their families, and had begun broadcasting interference patterns that would allow official military traffic while blocking personal contact. Sarah's technical contribution was a series of devices she called empathy engines, sophisticated signal processors that could analyze alien communications, identify personal content, and replace it with subtly modified versions designed to increase anxiety and uncertainty. Instead of blocking their messages home, she explained, we edit them. We introduce small delays, minor transmission errors, subtle changes in tone that suggest distress or disconnection. The psychological warfare was Marcus's specialty. Using his military training combined with Dr. Vasquez's research into Zephyrian behavioral patterns, he developed a series of scenarios designed to trigger specific emotional responses in the occupying forces. We start by making them notice how long they've been away from home, he outlined to the assembled resistance leaders. Subtle reminders of time passage, references to seasons changing, markers that emphasize the duration of separation. Then we escalate to uncertainty about the welfare of their loved ones. Equipment malfunctions that interrupt communications at crucial moments, false alarms that suggest emergencies back home, technical problems that require them to repeat emotional messages multiple times. Dr. Chun had been studying the physiological effects of chronic stress on Zephyrian metabolism. Their stress response is remarkably similar to ours, but they're not used to emotional uncertainty. Their society is apparently built around predictable social bonds and regular contact with attachment figures. The final phase was what Sarah privately thought of as the Manhattan Project of Emotional Warfare. Working with a team of psychologists, engineers, and artists, they developed a citywide system that would simultaneously subject every Zephyrian in the area to an orchestrated experience of heartbreak and separation anxiety. We call it the resonance field, Sarah explained to Marcus as they stood on the roof of their converted apartment building, looking out over a city that had been transformed into an enormous psychological warfare apparatus. Every building in Manhattan had been modified with carefully placed acoustic devices, electromagnetic field generators, and optical systems that could work in concert to create an environment of controlled emotional manipulation. The modifications were invisible to casual observation, but would create a persistent, low-level experience of unease and longing for any Zephyrian within the field's range. The beautiful thing about heartbreak, Marcus said, unconsciously echoing Dr. Vasquez's words from weeks earlier, is that it's universal. Every species we've encountered seems to experience attachment and loss in fundamentally similar ways. Sarah nodded, her attention focused on the final calibrations of the field generators. And the beautiful thing about humans is that we're apparently the only species insane enough to weaponize our own emotional trauma and turn it into a strategic advantage. As they worked, reports came in from resistant cells around the world. London had developed a system for making Zephyrian soldiers experience homesickness, so acute they could barely function. Tokyo had created an entire district that induced profound loneliness in any alien who entered it. Sao Paulo had somehow convinced their city's population to collectively project an aura of desperate romantic yearning that left Zephy.